Hello again, and welcome back to our study of Peninei Halacha, the teachings of Rav Eliezer Melamed, as we study the laws of Purim. We find ourselves getting closer and closer to the big day, and these halachos are becoming more and more appropriate and good for us to know as we approach the Chag. We are now continuing with the laws of Mishloach Manot, Siman Hey. We're in chapter 16, Siman Hey. Be'eza manos mekaimim hamitzvah. Shtei hamanos tzrichim liyos shona zumizu. The two food items that you send should be different from one another. Kamo lamashal lechem o basar va'orez, o dag o beitzim, o ogos v'tapuchim. So the examples that he gives are, let's say, bread and meat and rice, fish and eggs. Those of you who know me, of course, would know that I would never send fish nor receive fish. O ugos with tapuchim, or some sort of mezonos, cookies or cake, and apples. You could also send two types of meat. Okay, now we're talking. Two different types of meat with different types of flavor. Let's say one is cooked or boiled and the other one is roasted. Or let's say they're both cooked in a certain way, in the same way, but they are different cuts of meat. The appearance and the taste is clearly different. And you can also send two different types of mezonos, let's say, two different types of cake or cookie, provided that they are different in their appearance and in their taste. By the way, this will downplay also the myth that it has to be two different blessings. So we see clearly here from Melamed Paskins, and it's based on the Shulchan Aruch, that you can have two items that are the same blessing. Hashalech lechavero beged o sefer, o shehem bevadai misamchim mevatim ba'ava, lo yatsi yidei chavasa, mnei she'amonot tzrichim lios b'divrei ma'achal. So let's say you have a friend who's a bibliophile, loves books, and you want to send a book and on Purim as Mishloach Manot. While that's a very nice gesture and will bring him a lot of happiness, it'll bring her a lot of joy. Nevertheless, you do not fulfill your obligation with a book because it has to be a food item. However, that doesn't mean that you cannot do these acts. Once you have fulfilled the base mitzvah of giving food items to your friend, your neighbor, and you increase the camaraderie, and if you wanted to further increase camaraderie by giving these other items, then kol hakavod, why not? Hashalech of chai lechavero lo yatzei lechavasa. If you send a live bird to your recipient, you have not fulfilled the obligation, because you have to send something that is readily edible. Because when you sell a live bird, aside from all the other complications of that transaction, you have to shecht it, and you have to cut it, and you have to salt it, you have to cook it, etc., etc. It's a whole process, and it's not something that is ready to eat. According to this reasoning, Rav writes that maybe one shouldn't send raw meat, because even though it's ready to be cooked, but since it is not necessarily edible at the moment, you shouldn't send such a thing. Rather, you should just send things that are ready. You should be able to open up the package, open up the container, and eat it on the spot. And you could send certainly closed containers, because that's not considered something that requires a lot of preparation. You merely have to open the container, and then the food is ready to eat. Bakbuk shel mashke sheyesh lo chashivas, kmo yayin, o bira, o mitz ta'im. Let's say you send a beverage, a bottle of something, but it has to have certain, what we call chashivas, a certain level of chashivas we usually interpret as importance, but meaning this is something that I would be happy to get. Wine, beer, or a type of juice, he says. According to Ladas Rov HaPoskim Nechshav Kimani, he says, according to most authorities, this is certainly considered as an item that you could send for Mishloach Manot. And you could even give two. So let's say you wanted to give a nice bottle of wine and a nice bottle of schnapps, that would count as Mishloach Manot. However, others are very strict other authorities, and they say that a drink is not considered a mana, meaning we're talking about Mishloach Manot, so it's not a mana. Let's say today So in order to account for all different opinions here, we want to make sure that at least we send one food package that has 2 items of food and does not include a drink. As I've referenced in the past in previous episodes, of course, we think back to my childhood when we took a paper plate and we would staple it on the corners, make it into like a Haman's hat, and we put a bottle of grape juice, a box of raisins, an apple, hamantasha that my mother would make, something like that. It was very simple before today when we've gotten into, again, this is my own personal commentary, what we call competitive Mishloach Manos. You have to have a theme, and you have to have a catchy card, and you have to have all kinds of stuff. While it's a beautiful thing, and it definitely increases camaraderie, sometimes we think about maybe we should stick to the base mitzvah and perhaps, as we discussed previously, focus more of our resources on matanos le'avyon and perhaps giving to those who are more needy. But everybody means well, and everybody does the mitzvah beautifully, and it's really wonderful to see. And each food item should be enough that you would serve it to a guest, that it would be in a very, very practical way. Aval shezif echad l'mashal ena b'shir she'efshar l'chabed bo oreach. Let's say he gives the example of shezif, a plum, where if you had 1 plum, it's not considered enough. Like you wouldn't give your guest a plum. So if you want, you give a cluster of plums, or however plums come. I can't tell you that I have shopped for plums recently, but a nice portion of plums, not just a single plum. He says it should be, some say that we don't always talk about a shiur, what's the minimum amount, that it should be at least the size of 3 eggs. And some say also it should be befitting of the sender and also the recipient. If person that you're sending to, let's say, is a wealthy person, it would be something that they would expect, that they would feel is bakavadik. However, if it's not something that would be important or even feasible in their eyes, then you wouldn't be yotzei the mitzvah. So he says that we should have at least the size of 3 eggs. And again, we want to make sure that they are considered important, feasible, desirable in the eyes of both the sender, the mishalech, and also the recipient. Again, we have to just kind of understand what exactly we're doing with this mitzvah. We want to make sure that we are increasing camaraderie. It's not about a competition. Who has a better looking shalach manos, so he has a cuter theme. It's not about that. It's about sending actual food gifts, food items, and to the recipient, and they will be happy with receiving this food package, but also something that is readily edible, something that they can use, and something that will help enhance their Purim. Again, this often will fall into the category of whatever you do is right. It's hard to do this incorrectly, and we all try to do all of the mitzvos in wonderful fashion, and I'm sure this is no exception. I hope everybody has a great day, and we will see you next time on our shiur on Peninei Halacha.